Good morning. It's Tuesday, the 14th of January. You are tuned in to our 10 a.m. newscast coming to you from Arirang's news centre in Seoul. Let's take a look at what's making the headlines. President Park Geun-hye, who leaves for India on Wednesday, will push to open the world's second most populous nation wider to Korean businesses, particularly those in the nuclear energy sector. The United States and Russia discuss a possible localized ceasefire in civil war-ravaged Syria ahead of Syrian peace talks planned for Switzerland on January 22nd. Plus, anti-government protesters in Thailand fill the streets of Bangkok, demanding the Prime Minister step down before any election is held. Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra has offered to discuss delaying a February election with opposition leaders. During her first overseas trip of the year, which takes her to India, President Park Geun-hye is said to be planning on helping Korea break into Indian nuclear business market. This according to AFP, which also cites India's foreign ministry spokesman as saying New Delhi will have to first have its atomic energy department consolidate the two countries' civilian nuclear program before making more developments. Korea and India signed a civil nuclear cooperation agreement in 2011, after which Seoul has been looking to build nuclear power plants in Asia's third largest economy. President Park will sit down with Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh on Thursday local time, where the two leaders are expected to expand ties on a wide range of issues, including economy and science technology. The president will then head to Switzerland for a state visit on Saturday, where she will attend the World Economic Forum in Davos and give a keynote speech on the creative economy and entrepreneurship. President Park has made another supportive reference to a possible reunification of the two Koreas. In an interview with Bloomberg News published on Monday, President Park said reunification would serve as an opportunity for the Korean economy to take a, quote, fresh leap forward, talking about how a unified Korea would significantly reduce military spending on the peninsula. She added that her administration would do its best to make more people understand and recognize the need for reunification. The article then introduced the president's plans to launch a campaign to promote opportunities for merging South Korea's capital and technology and the North's human and natural resources. And for more on the prospects of a unified Korea, in the first of our three-part series on reunification, our Hwang Sang-hee takes a closer look at how, despite the high price tag, reunification could benefit both Koreas.
For now, I am against reunification.
Other than mandatory military service, nothing really affects me, so I have no interest.
Realistically speaking, I oppose reunification for now.
A recent poll conducted by the Joseonilbo shows only 2 out of 10 South Koreans are supportive of a reunified Korea. Most in South Korea say that reunification will just add to Seoul's economic burden. And in fact, a reunified Korea does come with a hefty price tag. Figures released by the Korea Institute for National Unification show that the process of bringing the two Koreas together would cost South Korea an estimated $3.5 trillion. But President Park Geun-hye thinks reunification would be worth it.
저는 한마디로 통일은 대박이다. 이렇게 생각을 합니다.
A recent study shows reunification would fuel Korea's economic growth, making it the world's 5th most advanced economy by 2050, with a gross domestic product of $6.5 trillion. With South Korea's technology and North Korea's young population, a reunified Korea's per capita gross national income would increase from the current $23,000 in South Korea to more than $80,000 in 2050. But all this would be possible only under a gradual, peaceful reunification.
But if there are any disruptions affecting this transition process, for example, opposition to privatization, then the cost will increase, benefit will decrease.
But aside from the economic benefits, the single most important motivation for reunification stands.
Some of my relatives were separated from their families during the Korean War. When I see them, it makes me sad. I don't know the details, but Korea is the only country that remains divided.
I think reunification is essential because one people should not be living with a dividend in between them.
황성희, Arirang News.
Moving now to the main opposition, Democratic Party's New Year's press conference. Party chief Kim Han-gil took aim at President Park's goals for the year while outlining his own. Now, Kim Yeon-ji reports on his plans to fight for the middle class and expand universal welfare.
Democratic Party chief Kim Han-gil criticized President Park's New Year's speech, saying she failed to provide concrete details on how she intends to improve the livelihoods of ordinary people in a country with the world's highest suicide rate among the young and senior citizens.
The president did not mention economic democratization or welfare, even once during her New Year's speech. It's shocking.
Kim said his party will promote welfare support aimed at helping people live a dignified life.
My party will strengthen policy for education, housing, and healthcare to stop the collapse of the middle class and restore the ladder of hope that enables the poor to move into the upper class.
Specifically, the Democratic Party chief said his party will push for free school meals, free high school education, and cutting the cost of college tuition in half. He added that he and his party will work toward putting a cap on rental prices, including jeonse, which requires that a large lump sum deposit be paid up front and is returned in full at the end of the rental period. Kim also called for a strengthening of public health care policy and an expansion of public medical facilities for patients with severe diseases and dementia. He stressed that the party will oppose any attempt by the government to privatize health care or railway services. He also said he welcomed President Park's concept of reunification as a jackpot for the two Koreas, but stressed that the government must be sure to take practical steps to improve inter-Korean relations and prepare for a gradual and peaceful reunification with North Korea.
Targeting the local elections in June, the Democratic Party leader vowed to overcome the factionalism within his party and respond quickly to the public's demands. To break a long-standing deadlock in parliament, he pledged to push for an independent investigation into the alleged illegal electioneering by state institutions in 2012. Kim Yeon-ji, Arirang News.
After a months-long tug-of-war, South Korea and the United States have finally settled on a new cost-sharing agreement for the stationing of U.S. troops in Korea. But some are questioning whether this was the best deal Seoul could have got. Han-dan reports.
$866.6 million. That is the amount South Korea will pay this year to keep the more than 28,000 U.S. troops on the Korean peninsula. Seoul's foreign ministry says this was a successful deal, as Washington has settled on an amount that's $75 million less than what it initially wanted, despite automatic spending cuts known as the sequester that have slashed the military's budget. But what's more worthy of notice, officials say, is that the U.S. agreed on specific measures to enhance transparency. Washington had long been criticized by the South Korean public for not revealing how defense costs were spent. A new monitoring system will be set up that'll effectively track shared military expenditures, and the two sides will be required to submit annual spending reports to the Korea-U.S. Integrated Defense Dialogue, better known as KIDD. The U.S. will also report defense cost outlays on the peninsula to the Korean parliament.
We have made an effort to produce a reasonable outcome that's acceptable to the parliament and the people, taking into account the stationing conditions for the U.S. troops, as well as our government's financial capacity.
But some are critical of the deal, saying it has left several long-standing issues unresolved. They point out that Washington is not keeping its promise to shoulder the cost of relocating the main U.S. military base from Seoul to Pyeongtaek in 2016. Instead, they seem to be amassing a large amount of money and asking for more, but it's not clear how much has gone to the Pyeongtaek relocation. The deal will be taken to the parliament in early February for ratification. But amid such divided opinions, it looks like it won't necessarily be smooth sailing. And then, Arirang News.
A former Japanese pro wrestler turned opposition lawmaker is in North Korea to promote sports exchanges. Speaking to reporters prior to his departure from Beijing on Monday, Antonio Inoki said he was hoping to have a discussion that would boost Japan-North Korea relations. Inoki, who has close ties with North Korea, having travelled to the country nearly 30 times, plans to meet with Kim Young-il, director of the International Department of the Workers' Party, to discuss arrangements for sports exchanges and a visit by a Japanese parliamentary delegation. The Japanese lawmaker also says he wants to learn about North Korea's plans for the future following the purge last month of leader Kim Jong-un's once powerful uncle, Jang Song-taek. Now we have the first in our 5-part series on Korea's industrial competitiveness with the parts and materials industry. The sector, which used to depend heavily on imports, now leads the nation's exports thanks to active corporate investment and government support. Our Hwang Ji-ae looks at the prospects and the challenges that remain.
This Korean semiconductor packaging company has recently found a way to make the world's thinnest chip.
Normally, companies produce 1 millimeter thick semiconductors, but we're able to produce them with a thickness of half of that. We are ahead of every other company.
Until around 10 years ago, Korean companies hardly reported any breakthrough in the manufacturing of parts and materials, but it's a different story these days. Now Korea is the world's 5th largest parts and materials exporting nation, closely following Japan.
And with the domestic parts and materials sectors getting a boost recently, the trade surplus last year reached a record high of nearly $100 billion.
That is nearly 40 times larger than the sector's trade surplus recorded in 2001. Exports of parts and materials currently take up almost half of the nation's overall exports. Experts say the improving competitive edge of Korea's finished goods are also helping the parts and materials sectors.
The rise in exports of products like television, mobile phones, automobiles, and machinery have pushed up demand for key components of those goods.
The Seoul government is determined to make Korea the world's 4th largest exporter of parts and materials by 2020, surpassing Japan and more than doubling the sector's trade surplus to $250 billion. While the nation has made a leap forward in manufacturing parts, it still lags behind in developing new materials.
The problem is Korea is far behind Japan in the area of new materials, while China is catching up fast in making parts.
To narrow the gap with Japan, the government has promised to pour $280 million into the local industry every year until 2025. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
Staying with economic news, it appears the Korean economy is becoming even more dependent on its 2 biggest conglomerates, Samsung and Hyundai Motor. Data released by chaebol.com shows the combined operating profit of the 2 conglomerates amounted for more than 30% of that of all Korean companies for the first time in 2012. Samsung accounted for about 21%, while Hyundai Motor took up about 9%. Experts have raised serious concerns the country's heavy reliance on a few business giants could pose risks for the overall economy during a time of crisis. Responding to the report, Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok said the government is analysing the level of economic concentration of Samsung and Hyundai. Now, some good news for Korean consumers looking for bargains on their favourite imported products. The Finance Ministry says prices of foreign brand import clothing, cosmetics and watches will drop by as much as 50% in Korea as early as March. It says the move is to enhance competition among importers and will include the promotion of parallel imports to root out monopolies which are blamed for excessively high import prices. Parallel imports refer to the imports of goods outside distribution channels that own exclusive sales rights in a nation. Diplomats are trying to persuade the warring sides in Syria to firstly agree to show up at international talks in Geneva next Wednesday, and secondly to take a series of steps to improve the atmosphere at the discussions. Kwon So-ah reports.
With less than 10 days remaining until the Syria Peace Conference, known as Geneva II, kicks off in the Swiss city, the United States and Britain are pressing the Syrian opposition to attend the talks. Earlier, the rebels had said they would only attend if President Bashar al-Assad plays no role. Washington and London warned they may stop supporting the Syrian opposition coalition to the extent they have if they fail to show up. A senior official from the coalition, which the West recognizes as the legitimate representative of the country's people, said other countries like France, Saudi Arabia and Turkey asked that they come, but without pressure. The coalition says it will decide on its participation by Friday. It's also unclear whether Iran, which has a major influence in Syria, will attend, with deep divisions among world powers on that subject. The U.S. and Britain say Iranian delegates can come to Geneva if they accept the call for a power transition away from the Assad regime, but Russia wants Iran there whatever the conditions. This according to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who held talks with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry in Paris on Monday. Lavrov and Kerry were joined by UN envoy for Syria, Lakhdar Brahimi, where the three officials also talked about possible preconditions ahead of the peace talks.
But we talked today about the possibility of trying to encourage a ceasefire, maybe a localized ceasefire, beginning with Aleppo. And both of us have agreed to try to work to see if that could be achieved. The opposition has already agreed that if the Assad regime were willing to declare that, they would live up to it, and they're prepared to do that.
Possible prisoner exchanges and opening humanitarian access to besieged areas were discussed too, with the aim of creating a better atmosphere in Geneva. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Israel has paid its final respects to former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon at a state memorial service. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, top Israeli officials and around 20 international delegates paid tribute to Sharon Monday at the ceremony outside Israel's parliament. U.S. Vice President Joe Biden, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Middle East International Envoy Tony Blair were among the international guests. The Israeli army says 2 rockets from Gaza landed in Israel prior to the service, but no one was injured. Sharon was later buried on a family ranch close to Gaza. Sharon, who died on Saturday at the age of 85 after spending 8 years in a coma, is remembered as a hero at home, but seen by many Arabs as a war criminal. In Thailand, the country's under-fire Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra has invited opposition leaders to discuss possibly delaying a snap election set for February 2nd. Her proposal came as protesters calling for her resignation shut down Bangkok on Monday. Connie Kim reports.
In a planned protest to overthrow embattled Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra, about 50,000 protesters blocked major intersections in the capital city of Bangkok on Monday. Protesters said they will also cut off electricity and water supplies to some government offices. The People's Democratic Reform Committee protest group is behind Monday's Bangkok shutdown. They are demanding that an appointed government run the country and a cancellation of February elections, which Yingluck's ruling party are almost certain to win. They say the current leader is only a proxy for her brother, exiled former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra, who was ousted by the military in 2006. 140 schools were closed on the first day of the demonstrations Monday, along with dozens of hospitals, hotels, and fire stations. The government has beefed up security, stationing about 20,000 police and military personnel in and around the capital. So far, the protests have been without violence. Ahead of the planned shutdown, protesters led by head protest leader Suthep Thaugsuban started blocking major intersections in the capital to create traffic jams where an estimated 700,000 vehicles pass through on a daily basis. Things turned violent when unknown gunmen opened fire on a group of anti-government protesters at a rally site in Bangkok. At least 7 people were injured. Protest leader Suthep said the rallies will continue unless Prime Minister Yingluck steps down.
We cannot compromise on any offers. This is non-negotiable. So if we lose this fight, then we lose. If we win, then we win. There's no win-win for both sides.
The army and the police have expressed concerns of escalating violence that could lead to a coup attempt. Since the protests began in October, 8 people have died and 470 have been injured in street violence. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Pope Francis continues to spread his message of peace and unity, this time calling on the two Koreas to work towards reconciliation on the Korean peninsula. In a speech to the Vatican Diplomatic Corps Monday, the Pope said he trusted that, for the good of all the Korean people, the interested parties will tirelessly seek out points of agreement. Francis also said he was gravely worried about the humanitarian situation in Syria and said urgent aid should be allowed to reach all parts of the country. He also pleaded for peace in Egypt, Iraq, South Sudan, Nigeria and the Central African Republic.
And a good Tuesday morning to you all as we kick things off with the South Korean national football team heading over to Brazil for their winter training. Now, manager Hong Myung-bo and 23 players left for Brazil on Monday in preparation for their winter training. Now, the team consists of players who play in Korea, Japan, and China, and does not include those playing in Europe. While the roster isn't what we'll see during the World Cup, it'll be a great chance for some of the players to get some time on the pitch and get used to playing for the national team. Now, the team will begin training in Brazil before playing several friendlies against Costa Rica, Mexico, and the United States. And speaking of the national team, the U22 team is currently playing in the U22 AFC Championships in Oman. And with the group stages going on, Korea bounced back from their 1-1 draw against Jordan on Saturday and beat Myanmar 3-0 to go 1-1 after 2 matches. Meanwhile, they'll be facing off against Oman in their final group stage match. And moving on, if Korea has Kim Yeon-ah, looks like the United States has 18-year-old Gracie Gold as their Olympic hopeful for the figure skating competition. And the two skaters will collide in about a month. After winning the U.S. Figure Skating Championships and earning her ticket to the Sochi Winter Games, Gracie Gold will look to claim the gold against the person who she claimed is her role model back in March during the World Championships. And according to Michelle Kwan, Gold's technical ability is comparable to Kim Yeon-ah and is in arm's reach of the Olympic gold. And over to baseball, Yoon Sung-min has yet to sign with a major league team, but he'll be leaving to the U.S. once again in hopes to finally sign with the team. Now, on Wednesday, the righty will leave to the U.S. once again as his agent Scott Boras stated that the Boston Red Sox and the Minnesota Twins are showing interest in the pitcher. And while his previous shoulder injury is the only concern for the teams, experts believe that the 28-year-old needs to sign as a reliever and not a starter. And now finishing things off, after several years of being overshadowed by Barcelona striker Lionel Messi, Cristiano Ronaldo has finally beat Messi for the Ballon d'Or award. Now, earlier today, the Real Madrid midfielder was named the 2013 Ballon d'Or winner, his first since winning the FIFA World Player of the Year honors back in 2008. Meanwhile, Lionel Messi finished second in the voting, followed by Frank Ribéry of Bayern Munich. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day and see you guys again for your sports needs.
And time now to check in on the weather conditions in Korea and around the world. And that's all for now. Have a fabulous rest of the day, and we do hope to see you back again for our next newscast, which is coming up at noon, Korea time.